talked about pairs and pairedness consistently, and this is a pair of molecules. And this is a reminder that we're moving towards science. And the last 3 months of this year, the winter season of this final year, has to do with science. Pen back. And these models can be yours. You can build them. If you'll take yourself to Caltech or UCLA and get yourself this nice little model kit. I think they're about $20 or something like that. And with a limited repertoire of objects, you can build every organic molecule in the universe. So this is quite amazing, and it's a way to lead into the lecture for today. By the way, this pair of molecules, this little molecule is ethanol. This is alcohol. This is what makes your drinks sparkle. And this is the pair to it. This is the molecule for aspirin. So I'll put the little demon and its pal on the table there, and you can contemplate while we're talking today about pairs. In our education, we're constantly paying attention to a fundamental comportment. That fundamental comportment is spearheaded by a simple question: what are we doing? And when we began last year, for the first 3 or 4 weeks, we constantly reminded ourselves to become aware, perhaps not on a deep enough level to be called witnessing, but at least aware of what is it that we're doing. And we fundamentally recognized that we were coming together every Saturday morning. Many of us are old enough to remember that Saturday mornings in the United States were a playtime, a time for playing. But that time of playing was very often in terms of the radio. And Saturday morning radio programs, especially in the Second World War, were filled with a kind of a charm, the kind of charm that you find in fairy tales. And it charmed a whole generation of little boys and some little girls into a sense of adventure that eventually took that generation to the moon. The generation after them that were raised on television have not gone to the moon. They're not going to the moon. And there's a radical difference between radio and television. For radio spurs the imagination. It invites the imaginative cooperation. It's true interaction. The interactive quality of radio is phenomenal. Whereas television deadens, unless the television monitor is actively and consciously incorporated in a differential consciousness, it deadens. The very physiological action of the eyes is to reach a kind of a slight bugging out passivity, kind of like in Indian wrestling when you come to a dead still. And the passive, slightly bulging eyes lean on the panoply and play of images like crutches. The imagination becomes febrile, unable to really exercise itself. It has no bones. And instead, it has a glib quality of quipping and little segue commentaries at associative junctures, and one comes up with a generation that are very good at wisecracks but do not go to the moon. Cleverness is not a very good diet. And what we're trying to do in the education here is to encourage ourselves that what we're doing by coming here every Saturday morning is not just lining up some kind of habituation, not some kind of repetitive dullness, not just some talking head on a monitor or some expert sitting in a chair. That's not it at all. In fact, it's extraneous to the actual process that's happening. Your invitation here constantly is like the invitation in radio, to allow a voice to spend some time in your attention, to allow for no blackboards, very few images, just simply a voice like radio, inviting your imagination to play. And as you allow that play to happen, something very fundamental occurs. One of the greatest of all historians of ideas, Johann Huizinga, wrote a book one time called Homo Ludens, Man Who Plays, and that our species is in fact a species that enjoys the play. Even the modern name for drama, play, has that kind of connotation, has that resonant quality, that in the dynamic and active gestalts of something, there is somehow a higher energy than in the passive, static, diagrammatic structure. And this is indeed true. In fact, it is true on any level that one wishes to consider. For instance, if we turned to some recent monograph, here Oxford Studies in Nuclear Physics, Nucleon Momentum and Density Distributions in Nuclei, Oxford Science Publications, 1988. If one were to struggle through this kind of nuclear science monograph, and you could wade through the math, what you would come up with is an understanding that the key term here, nucleon momentum, is in fact what modern nuclear science has taken as its quality, its norm. And the old static understanding of the atom, of nuclear energy, that held for the first couple of decades because of limitations of math, actually, because of limitations of experimental material, but also because of limitations of vision, have largely been displaced and superseded in fantastic array by the dynamic study at higher energy states of the atom. And so we find a statement like this in the preface: "It is thus important to determine the momentum distribution of the nucleons in the nucleus, and to integrate that knowledge with what we already know of nuclear structure." Just knowing a structure is not enough. A simple structure does not convey at all the full resonance of what is happening, the tremendous implications in terms of meaning. When we look at these two molecules, alcohol and aspirin, the poison and the antidote, we can recognize that there are only three kinds of atoms that make up both. And in fact, the same three atoms make up both. The black are carbon atoms, the white are hydrogen atoms, and the red are oxygen atoms. The same three atoms that go in to make up the molecular structure of aspirin make up the molecular structure of alcohol. So one could say that there is some kind of a trinity of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen that's behind a great deal of the organic chemistry of the universe. And one could go into great developments of this and in fact do a metaphysical system. All of that would be beside the point. None of that would be germane or interesting finally, because the diagrammatic level, this level, is insufficient to convey the wonderful magic that alcohols perform in organic chemistry. Without the alcohols, there would be no fermentation, there would be no digestion, there would be none of the interesting cuisine. And you can follow where that goes from there. We could say just as much, perhaps, in this age for the aspirin. And in fact, one of the great histories of the 1920s was called the aspirin age. What's important here? Nuclear physics, basic organic chemistry, is to understand that the dynamic, the momentum gestalt of something is where the magic is. It's where the universe is alive. It's where the full meaning is developed. It's where the maturity has its capacity revealed. And indeed, a lot of what the lecture today is about, the presentation today is about, has to do with this introduction. In our education, we have followed a consistent kind of a methodology. We've spent 12 weeks on a given phase and then given ourselves a punctuation, an interval, then another 12 weeks on a succeeding phase, articulated again by another interval, then another 12 weeks and another interval. And we have found that when we have 4 of these 12-week phases and 4 intervals in between, we have achieved a universal structure, a structure, in fact, that holds everywhere that structure could be perceived. We have a quaternary, a 4-part division, and we have a secondary plot, a subplot, another quaternary structure, slightly displacing the first, and turned, as a matter of fact, in the classic ancient wisdom tradition of 90 degrees. The Pythagorean understanding was the 90-degree right-angle turn was the key to fixing, to making permanent a structural integration. And so when we take a cross and add to it an X, we get an 8-part radiation from a common center. And so our education has this kind of static structure. And one could talk about this kind of static structure, how the first 12-week section relates to the third 12-week section in a kind of a vertical quality, and how the second 12-week section relates to the fourth 12-week section, and that these phases have a kind of a horizontal quality to them both. And we talked about how the first and third phases are actually dynamic processes, as opposed and in contrast to the second and fourth, which have an objective quality. That the first and the third of these phases in the first year of our education were nature and language. And that nature and language are characterized by a constant, ceaseless, dynamic pizzazz. Oh, they're always happening. They're always going on. Not so much restless as ceaseless, active. And that part of the mystery of language is that it has great affinity to the mystery of nature. And there are times when one glimpses participating in the mystery of language. Little boys lined up in 1943 in front of a radio watching the little red button, listening to The Shadow. What evil lurks in the minds of men? And the shadow knows. Those little boys went to the moon. Those little boys sent their machines on their way throughout the whole star system and now going out into interstellar space. Because there's a quality in the mystery of language when it is all-inclusive that we become affine to the mystery of nature. And by having been invited by the mystery of nature and initiated by the mystery of language, we are free to go. We are free to be mobile anywhere that the imagination can conceive or explore. We have earned that freedom by an actual resonance which obtains. For this universe respects, it must respect affine resonance. The little gray energy bonds that hold atoms together in molecular structures, those are resonance made objective. How do these carbon atoms stay in this relationship, this precise angular relationship? There are not little gray plastic things in the molecules. These are energy momentum relationalities. And those energy momentum relationalities are very much like the integral, interval, articulate lectures in between the phases, in between nature and ritual and language or myth and symbol. In between each of those phases, we had an interval lecture, 4 of them. And the function of those interval lectures was not only to give articulation to the difference of the phases. Nature is different from ritual in many respects. Perhaps the most fundamental of all respects is that ritual is objective, whereas nature is never objective. When one is realistic about nature, it is not objective, ever. It is always disappearing, ever smaller, ever more refined, ever more elusive, before our grasp that would forever find exactly what it is. We can only recognize now on the subatomic, super energetic levels that nature is characterized by what the ancient Chinese would call change. And so we took at the very beginning of our education the I Ching as a way of beginning to enter the stream of an educational activity. But because we wanted to have not a single line of development that could somehow, without our attentiveness, end up in being a condition of enough rope. Dorothy Bennett's great admonition to the human race, beware of enough rope. We took a pair of books so that we would develop a paired line of development. And this paired quality allows us to explore dynamic relationalities which otherwise would be obviated by the hypnotic attention to the diagrammatic. And once one has fallen prey to the fever of the diagrammatic, you become susceptible ever after to the passing whims of diseases called metaphysics. This is somewhat of an H.L. Mencken soliloquy. I can deliver the Clarence Darrow side also, but that costs more. What's being said here is that the interval lectures are extremely important, and today is another interval lecture. The interval lectures not only allow for articulation of different phases, the objective from the process, but allows for a behind the scenes, larger than any diagrammatic pairing, larger than any integrative consistency, to explore what otherwise would be terra incognita, unknown land. And all of the materials that have been chosen for these integral lectures have a shared quality in that they address themselves to an ineffable quality which rises in us unbidden if we simply stop looking at things, stop conceiving as our attention and comportment to be resting on things, stop watching the TV of life, turn off the picture, and listen to what is being said. Listen to what is murmuring in this wide world. And there comes a quality of wild attentiveness, something untamed in the heart, gains courage, gains breath and vitality, and begins to hear not only sounds in this world, but sounds beyond this world. Pythagoras said he could hear the music of the spheres, and gave, in fact, a dynamic, proportional way of reproducing the music of the spheres. And out of that came the musical octave, which is the foundation of all developments in Western music up till the 20th century. The first of the interval lectures, if you recall, at the end of nature, was the Tao Te Ching. In keeping with the I Ching, and we paired with the I Ching Thoreau's journals, selections from his journals. We wanted to have not just a single book, but a pair of books, not just a single thread that would end up being too much rope, enough rope, too much rope, but a pair of threads that would begin to intertwine, to not just braid, but become like a double helix, have this quality of being able to energize a fruitful fertility to the process of engagement. So the Tao Te Ching was in keeping with the I Ching, and at the end of the ritual section, we took the Mundaka Upanishad, and we began the ritual section with a pair of books, Black Elk, his book, The Sacred Pipe, and Sir James George Fraser's The Golden Bough. That ritual had to do, we found, from Black Elk and from Sir James George Fraser. Interesting to take a pair of men who in their own lifetimes were at completely opposite ends of the social agenda. Sir James George Fraser was invited to every soiree that the British Empire ever wanted to make. Black Elk never was even fed most of his life. He lived on the Manderson, South Dakota reservation fringes and damn near starved many times. But both Black Elk and Sir James George Fraser shared the realization that the very rock foundation of human life, in fact of all life, in fact of all reality, is that it exists. That existence is the first objective reality, the first thing which we can not only point to, but we can build upon. And we can trust that's there. We've done this. We can go from here. And so the interval selection for that ritual existence process was the Mundaka Upanishad. In Sanskrit, the word mund means razor. Razor as in shaving. And interestingly enough, all by himself, unknowing about the traditions of Upanishadic Vedic Indian philosophy, a late medieval logician named William of Ockham came up with the exact same technique as the Mundaka Upanishad. In fact, it's known in Western philosophy history as Occam's razor. That you shave away from your statements everything that is mutable, everything that is changeable. You stop uttering sentences and words and statements which change and move, and you come closer and closer to those words, those statements, those logical axioms that always hold. But if one follows the writings of William of Ockham really closely, he comes to that mystical threshold where he realized that there is a point where human language blinks out, shaves away every last word, but that man himself does not disappear. While language finds an exhaustion, man does not. And in that silence, man learns to hear what cannot be said. And that's the beginning of wisdom. The Mundaka Upanishad, 7 plus 14 is 2,100 years before, a whole world away from William of Ockham. The Mundaka Upanishad records also that there is a paring away of unessentials that leaves one with a single vowel, and that vowel, once uttered, does not have to be uttered again. And when the sound of that vowel, in its universal resonance, drops out of the range of human hearing, there's an energetic silence that occurs and is still there. So that when you write Om, you write it with an exclamation mark. Because the exclamation mark continues to occur even though the ritual sound of the vowel no longer obtains in existence. And so out of this came a deep, logical, mystical understanding that language has a different realm of applicability from existence. That language is in fact mysterious, like nature. Language is capable of doing high-level acrobatics without a net and to produce a quality like nature of continuing to occur even though existence no longer happens. So that when we went to myth and we took a look at language, we wanted to have the interval be some kind of book which would register for us this mysterious quality of language. And in scouring the world's literature to try and find something appropriate, I found that one of the best examples, like the Tao Te Ching for its interval purpose, and like the Mundaka Upanishad for its ritual and interval purpose, that Rilke's Sonnets to Orpheus was one of the most masterful ways of using language to its vanishing point and allowing for the exclamation mark to still occur. And so we used Rilke's Sonnets to Orpheus. Quoting the M.D. Herder Norton translation of one of them, a phrase in English from Rilke's German: "Easy for a god to do it, but how shall a man go where he can no longer be and still hear?" And each time we had one of these interval presentations, we no longer then considered that we were talking about the phase which we had been concerned with for 12 weeks, but we entered a new phase. And after Rilke, after myth, we came to symbol. And with symbol, we found that we were again in an objective realm, and that this objective realm has for its existential basis the actual nervous system, the brain, the spinal column, the neural system. We could simplify it by just saying the brain. The brain is objective. And by brain, recall now that the entire neural system is meant. You can train a hand to think. You can train hearing. You can train many aspects of the body to participate in thought. A good ceremonial dancer, his feet are educated. So brain is an extensive, resonant term. But symbols, because they characterize an objective level, this quality of the brain, this inner realm of the neural system, is as objectively real as existence itself. In other words, the neural reality is not an epiphenomenon, but equally phenomenal with existence. Its occurrence is as real and as objective as matter. Now, we found that to bring an interval conclusion to something like symbol, something objective in this profound inner reality mode, it took a very rare text, a very rare book, and I chose a Middle English Upanishad called The Cloud of Unknowing. An anonymous author, written in the time when the Midlands of England were filled with very peculiar vibrations. The kind of vibrations that produced a little epic jewel like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The kind of vibrations that influenced the English language to raise itself up to be able to talk about human character in such refined, elegant ways in Chaucer that we still think of Chaucer in his famous phrase about himself. What do you write about, Mr. Chaucer? A fair field full of folk. Writes about character, human character, and how the understandability of character is that it has recognizable types. We see the same kinds of people, lifetime after lifetime, century after century, millennium after millennium. The same types of people, but within those types, each individual is a rare, unique instance of a particular type. And so there's a fascination between meeting someone and understanding who uniquely they are, never to be repeated again, and to recognize interesting type. There is a wife of Bath probably in every community in every suburb of Los Angeles. Probably talking your head off on a flight to Las Vegas. These types always reoccur. But the peculiar, unique quality of the individual modifies and makes that type a special vector, a special angle, gives to the atom, which is recognizable, a special momentum, so that when it comes together, all the various facets of the typologically recognizable aspects of character. Yes, it's alcohol as a molecule, but there's a tremendous difference between a fine champagne and a bottle of cheap beer. The variety is astounding. And so we found that the reality of life, the reality of the universe, includes a whole different energy, a completely different way of being from the integral. The whole movement from nature to symbol is all of one pattern. It's all of one piece. It fits together. And if one wishes to consult such things, there are in every culture, in every major religion and area of the world, there were men and women who pursued that pattern of nature to its ultimate, to its vanishing point. You can call it realization. You can call it salvation, whatever you wish to call it. And that royal road, if one looks at the planetary heritage, is a 20-lane highway. There are many ways to go. But that is not the end-all of what is real. Nature does not exhaust. The model does not exhaust. The structure, in its full realization, does not exhaust what can be. And so out of that vanishing, out of that silence, out of that enlightenment, beyond that salvation is another world, another realm. And that other realm is characterizable even in some kind of hard language like higher mathematics. When first discovered by the Chinese and the early Sung dynasty, the methods of calculus were used as mind training games in Taoist monasteries in the Western Hills outside of Beijing. The White Cloud Monastery in the 1100s taught the rudiments of calculus for meditational techniques. But they had no tradition at that time of applying it, of developing it, of seeing where it goes. And it was only in the dog-eat-dog European era of the late 17th century that two geniuses like Sir Isaac Newton and G.W.F. Leibniz, when they both at the same time came together with a mathematical notation for calculus, that the application was seen and was made. And all of a sudden in the 1700s, you begin to see a sea change in the quality of something which is there beyond the brain. What is there beyond the brain? The inner world of the brain, the inner world of the neural networking level, that is still natural. There's no doubt whatsoever. It's still natural. But what comes out of that, beyond that, belongs to a different nature, is the kindest way to say it. It is supernatural. It used to be called magic. For a long time it was called magic. The better word, developed in the 1400s, was vision, and so we use that. Chaucer, incidentally, was the one who developed the Middle English term to displace magic, because it had all kinds of connotations of devilish inquisitions, even at that time. And so he coined the phrase and always put with it the word love. So that of Chaucer, we had the realization that love visions are the true magic. Love visions. There's something there in the visionary capacity of the lover, which allows them to still occur even though nature has finished its pattern, and there it is, completely realized, and yet there's something else. And this love visionary capacity is what we've been studying for the last 12 weeks. Now, to find the interval text to articulate that 3-month investigation, those 12 weeks, is very difficult. The choice of Rilke with the sonnets to Orpheus at the end of myth, at the end of language, was difficult enough. This is the most difficult of all the intervals there are. And so I turned again to a poet. I turned to the international scene, went back in time about 800 years, and I found the most ineffable visionary, love visionary voice on the planet was Rumi, known in Iranian tradition as Malavi. Jalaluddin Rumi. He lived in the 1200s. And Rumi has in his works the ability to culminate this love vision energy in such a way that the next phase happens. Now, the love vision energy is not integral. It doesn't integrate. It doesn't come together. It is radically different. Can I say it a different way? I can't, so let's just repeat it. It's radically different because it's just like the mathematical equations that deal with integration equally well deal with differentiation. Differential calculus is as real as integral calculus. There's absolutely no difference in the existential, in the mental, objective reality of their workings and process. You can apply to this real universe the dynamic, momentous results of Gestalt's and differential calculus just like you can with integral calculus. You can compute to any degree of accuracy that you want with differential calculus as you can with integral calculus. And so the whole second year of our education deals with this differential realm, this supernatural differential realm, and how it still has a parid quality of relating to nature, but it relates to nature in such a way that only by keeping the two distinct in a proportion can one come up with an accurate way of understanding, of applying, of living in such a way that it is accurate and real and enduring and transmissible. So that what characterizes a further development of ourselves is the ability to keep a ratio alive in our activity. The ratio of the differential to the integral. Now you can call this also a sense of proportion. But what characterizes this ratioed view, this angle of vision that is proportional? What characterizes it is a term that we use, sometimes a little glibly, but nevertheless it's still a good term. It's called consciousness. And that consciousness is not natural. Forget it. Yes, it comes out of nature, but it comes out of a transformation of nature. The alcohols that develop in the grape develop because the natural chemical structure of the grape dissolves. And in its decay and dissolving, the process of fermentation happens, and what was grape before in nature now becomes wine in consciousness. It's such a consistently, astonishingly simple thing that some of the world's greatest religions statements come out of this very basic realization, turning the water into wine. The very first miracle of Jesus at Cana, at a wedding, a love vision. A wedding is a love vision. And so at a love vision, what better scenario in which to disclose that one no longer is working with a blood that is based upon natural water cycles, but a blood which is based upon spiritual, fermented, supernatural cycles, the differential order. Now the machines are clicking off. And we will take a break, and I will come back exactly here, but I'd like to remind you something about machines. In the 22nd century, when men and women understand them, they will unplug them. In English, a poem of Rumi's to bring us back in. It reads like this. The moon offers light without a hand. The sun is proof of the sun. Writing about love, my pen splinters. Expounding love, the ass of intellect lays down in the mire. When he comes, not one hair of me remains. The shadow loves the sun, but when the sun comes, it vanishes. There is no dervish in all the world, and if there is a dervish, he doesn't exist. We're in vision, and we're moving towards art, and the interval in between is Rumi, and we'll get right to Rumi as soon as we cast our view ahead a little bit. Now remember that there are dimensions to this education, more than just the materials and the Saturday presentations and your involvements, your various projects and so forth. You're all busy making a sculpture to bring next week. And that sculpture is going to be given to someone else to redo. And then as just desserts, they've got to give it to a third person to redo. So you have a work of art which is going to be ruined. But to help you get through that trauma, you're also making a painting which in about 3 months you'll bring in, and you'll get to keep that painting and put it up in the corridor of some office bathroom and leave it there. A good practical joke, right? And you can sign it any artist you want, right? Is there a Neo Matisse? But in addition to that, there are films and music especially, and I would just like to encourage you that several of the films, we use 3 films each quarter, several of them are very difficult to find. One of them for art is Shakespeare Voila, James Ivory, just an exquisite film. What makes this film a work of art is its India pacing. The pacing of the film has the pace of India. A relentless slow motion crawl into eternity. And for its subject matter on the frieze of the slow motion crawl, excerpts from Shakespeare. A traveling Shakespearean company no longer in a culture that invites them or really wants them. As long as they were the jewel of the empires, they all wanted to have an English education, and Shakespeare was indispensable. But now that the India is free, um, they would rather look at economic reports. And so Shakespeare, Wella has this wonderful, vanishing nostalgia quality to it. And it has counterposed to the young actress who plays Shakespeare in her father and mother's company, the young Indian actress who wears all the low-cut gowns and the jewels and the baubles. I think you'll enjoy it. Shakespeare Walla. And if you can't find it, I have a copy here, and we'll arrange for a showing of it, and you can see it. Now, The Big Sleep. Did you know that The Big Sleep is a work of art? You betcha. The young, snappy Lee Brackett teamed up with the fairly crusty William Faulkner to do the screenplay is an unbeatable combination. Someday someone will write a biography of Lee Brackett, and they will see what an incredible woman she was. Her last screenplay was Rio Bravo, which he did for Howard Hawks. He had tried 3 times to make the same movie. Rio Bravo, El Dorado, and then finally Rio Lobo. And in Rio Lobo, he got it right because the screenplay was just ace perfect. And on her deathbed, she did the screenplay for The Empire Strikes Back. So she was one of the greats of Hollywood. So Lee Brackett and Faulkner together, working on Raymond Chandler's material. And of course, when you put that together with Howard Hawks at some of his best, you have a classic work of art. The version with Robert Mitchum, made in England, is also very interesting. Has qualities, and I would suggest that you see both of them, and preferably see them together as like a double bill. Try and rent them out and see them together. There's a quality here. Certain things are brought out by Michael Winner that are not brought out by Howard Hawks. For instance, the character of Eddie Mars in the English Big Sleep version is much more has the quality of massive strategic evil. Oliver Reed plays Eddie Mars in the British version, and he brings across this casual upper-class greasiness which the real low-down gangster really has. And he has it down pat, and that's why everyone really fears him. Because he will flick you off the map this afternoon. After a drink, yes, but nevertheless. And so both Big Sleeps qualify. The third, I couldn't dig out the cassette, but it's John Huston's The Dead. James Joyce's great story from the Dubliners. And Angelica Houston gives one of the really great performances. A dinner in Ireland on a snowy evening, and she slowly comes to experience in this dinner the vicissitudes of humanity in people that she knows, and she reaches a threshold of remembrance of a boy who loved her truthfully, and she rejected him for reasons that now she wonders if they hold up, and broke his heart, and he committed suicide. And it's one of the really great works of art in film. The old Huston, when he wanted to, could just could do it. So those 3 films, and the music for the interval is the overture to Die Meistersinger, Wagner's great, wonderful opera. The music for Vision was Mozart's Magic Flute, and this particular recording, Sir Neville Mariner, Academy of St. Martin's in the Fields, Die Zauberflöge, is a very, very good recording. So that was the music for Vision, and the music coming up for art is Beethoven's Symphony No. 9. And I would recommend that one of the wonderful performances of Beethoven's Symphony Number 9 was the one that was given in Berlin, directed by Leonard Bernstein, when the Berlin Wall came down. And the old Leonard Bernstein could put every ounce of his soul into a performance. And when he did that, you can see it, they made a video of it, and we have a copy of that here. There's something, Bernstein insisted that the orchestra get the articulation of all of the music and never lose it, though you raise the passion as high as you are able to. On one of the hallmarks of the old Bernstein, he was able to bring an orchestra to that fever pitch and still keep the music honed, so that the musical form was there, even though you were blind with tears of intensity. That is very difficult to do. Looking ahead, the music for science is perhaps very difficult. I was going to use some 12-tone music, but I think that stretches it a little bit. Instead, I have the second string quartet by Schoenberg. And it's very difficult to find, but I have the 4-string quartets by Schoenberg on this CD. And if need be, if you can't find it, I will do something about making a little cassette recording off this for study purposes. Try to find it. I also have a record of it, which I found at one of these used record warehouses here in Los Angeles, down on Melrose and Larchmont. And the guy said, we don't keep track of classical music. You'd have to find it yourself. There's no way. And I said, well, could I look? And in 1 minute, using a kind of a computation that I didn't want to talk about and still don't, I walked over and pulled it off the shelf, and he looked at me, and he looked at the record, and he shook his head, and he took the money, but I could see him. He wanted to ask me. And in Hollywood style, as I walked out, I said, it was a good guess. And then he forgot it, right? Aspirin and alcohol. They look nice together, right? I never forget the comment Dino De Laurentiis when he was casting Flash Gordon, a terrible movie that they made, and my daughter at the time said Flash Gordon looked like his smile was like a ham sandwich, very plain and boring. Dino said of the actor, I forget his name, he said, he looked good, no? No, Dino, he doesn't look good at all. In art, we're going to start off with Kandinsky concerning the spiritual and art. So get a copy of this. This copy in Dover is $3.50 concerning the spiritual and art. And if you feel flush, you can spend another $5 or so and get the Point and Line to Plane, which is the book that followed this up, sort of the sequel. Point, line, plane. It's the first 3 dimensions of the universe. A point is a locus of no dimension. That's what it says in high school geometry. The first axiom of Euclid, 2,300 years ago. A point is a locus of no dimension. And so geometry begins with a mystical no point. When it moves, you have a line. Notice here that if you misinterpret that as a diagram, you take your pen and you put a point and then you draw a line. But if you grew up with radio, you have a focus and you put it into a momentum. And that's how you get to the moon. Because you're able to conceive of a continuous, changing, exact phased momentum. And the math, incidentally, to get to the moon is very complex, and only one person knows it today. That person was in this course, incidentally, about 3 sessions ago, David Williams, who works for NASA down in Houston. He's a shuttle controller. And he learned it from the last of the men who programmed and set up the Apollo missions to the moon. Because you cannot just go to the moon. There's no way to just go. You have to go infinitesimal phase by infinitesimal phase, each phase existentially accurate, and you have to have a phase form transformation that goes all the way completely. If you stop at any particular point, you cannot get there, and you cannot get back. Part of the success of the drama of the Apollo mission that had the accident and came back was that they were able to excise exactly at the right phase and come back in exactly at the right phase so as to keep the mission on a track that allowed them to return to Earth. Had they not been able to snip at those two levels, those 2 points, those 2 actual existential phases, and seamlessly put the motion of the Apollo into that return sequence, they would never have been able to come home. It is not a question of raw power. You can't go anywhere in this universe with raw power. It takes a differential consciousness that can keep track of infinitesimally accurate existential realities and relate them together in one unity. That's how the cosmos is. That's how it works. And given that, we can go anywhere we can imagine. Anywhere we can imagine. God has put no shackles on his children. Along with Kandinsky, along with Concerning the Spiritual and Art, and if you can, Point and Line to Plane, the early version of Concerning the Spiritual and Art in the 40s was put out in this Documents of Modern Art series. That's how I bought it in the 50s. Along with Kandinsky, we're taking John Dewey's Art as Experience. I saw some paperback versions of it. It's in paperback, and you can find it around. And Art as Experience is one of John Dewey's greatest works. It came out late in his career, 1934, and if you go to a library, it's largely available now in collected works of John Dewey, the later works, Volume 10. And if you find it in the library, you'll find a whole shelf of John Dewey's works, like about 40 volumes. And this will be Volume 10 of the 3rd series, the earlier, the middle, and the later works. And in here, Dewey, for instance, writes this way in Art as Experience. We inherit much from the cultures of the past, the influence of Greek science and philosophy, of Roman law, of religion having a Jewish source, upon our present institutions, beliefs, and ways of thinking and feeling. All this is too familiar to need more than mention. In the operation of these factors, 2 forces have been injected that are distinctly late in origin and that constitute the modern in the present epoch. These 2 forces are natural science and application in industry and commerce through machinery and the use of non-human modes of energy. In consequence, the question of the place and role of art in contemporary civilization demands notice of its relations to science and to the social consequences of machine industry. So a lot of what we need to look at when we come to art at the very beginning is not the sophomoric, nor the sentimental, nor just the proverbially beautiful. But we need to start ourselves right away with a differential, clear-eyed look beyond those sentiments, beyond those assumptions, that art is in fact the first objective level in the differential energy of the universe. And why is that important to us? Because that's where we come in to being. The person, our person, is objectively real in the differential mode of the universe. It isn't mystical to say that in nature there are no persons. It's just simply the fact. As Buckaroo Banzai said, you can pound this rock of this mountain and sift through it for eternity, and you would never find this creature. And he shows up the eighth dimension creature that came out. Because it lives and exists in dimensional interstices that are not objectively real in nature, but are objectively real in higher proportions of the mathematics of the energy of the real. As Kandinsky will say, there's a tuning fork. And that art is one of those tuning forks that allows us to climb the ladder all the way to heaven. But we need to put our feet on every rung. Now let's come to Rumi. We started off with a poem, a mystical poem of his. Let's come to another mystical poem, one of his best. It has an intimate tone. It has a nostalgic invitation. It has almost a tragic nuance to it when read in the original Iranian. I should have recorded it. I had an Iranian friend of mine read it over the telephone to me this morning to get the right emotional tone. This is in volume 1, Mystical Poems of Rumi, translated by A.J. Arbery. Arbery was one of these British scholars who fortunately came under the aegis of a mentor who was equally a great scholar and a great mystic, R.A. Nicholson. And Nicholson in the 1890s was the first non-German European to understand the exquisite exactness of Persian mystical poetry. It had been understood by some German investigators, and it was only through the encouragement of Fitzgerald's translation of the quatrains of Omar Khayyam that there began to be this interest in Victorian England of the higher qualities of Persian poetry. But Omar Khayyam is a parlor entertainment compared to Rumi. You can enjoy Omar Khayyam in the salon lounges of the fringed furniture of a London flat. But for Rumi, you have to go outside, preferably into the wild mountainous country or out onto the high seas, and realize what a scale there is to being real. Here's the translation, number 80, from the first volume of Arbery. Die now, die now. In this love, die. When you have died in this love, you will all receive new life. Die now, die now. Do not fear this death, for you will come forth from this earth and seize the heavens. Die now, and break away from this carnal soul. For this carnal soul is as a chain, and you as prisoners. Take an axe to dig through the prison. When you have broken the prison, you will all be kings and knights. Die now, before your beauteous king. When you have died before the king, you will all be kings and renowned. Die now, and come forth from this cloud. When you come forth from this cloud, you will all be radiant, full moons. Be silent. Be silent. Silence is the sign of death. It is because of life that you are now fleeing from the silent one. So this quality of Rumi, the invitation to participate in something radically extraordinary. When Rumi was born in the early 1200s, he was born in the city Balkh, which is now in Afghanistan. It was a prosperous city, commercial center like Samarkand or many of the areas of Central Asia. But when he was a little boy, just coming into his first manhood, the Mongol hordes rose up on the steppes of Central Asia. And like a radioactive tidal wave, began blotting out civilizations. When they reached the area of Balkh, they had set upon a policy which Genghis Khan himself had determined. And the policy was that we are the forerunners of our own people's tribe, getting fertile grounds to raise their horses and to raise their sons. And in order to clear the way, we must comb through the landscape. And every man, woman, and child and animal must be killed to open up an unencumbered way for our descendants. And so when cities were taken, every inhabitant was killed. Every head was lopped off and mounded up. And this tidal wave went on for decades. Occasionally, someone would be spared for a little while to be of service in some way as an emissary to tell further peoples of what lay in store for them. But this catastrophic numbing went on to such an extent that by the time of the middle 1200s, a single Mongol could ride into a town and everyone would be petrified of him. One historian of the period remarked about seeing a Mongol take a man and throw him down in the dust and look to kill him in the Mongol way. The Mongol way was always to seize the living heart out of the victim, or if the heart were too entranced to bring out, to squeeze it to death. And he couldn't find a sword. And so he rode off and several hours later came back to the still supine man and then slit him open and then killed him. That the brutalization of the terror of the Mongol poisonous radioactive tidal wave simply brutalized into numbness that whole region of the world is never recovered. It has never recovered. Whole cities were completely eliminated. Rumi's mystical poetry was the first human voice to encourage the heart of man to beat again in face of this numbing brutality. And when he writes of the mystical power of love, he does not do it from any goddamn parlor chair. He does it in face of an apocalyptic, catastrophic dead end. So that when he writes sometimes, if I can find the right poem here, here's how he writes of love sometimes. Love took sleep away from me, and love takes sleep away For love purchases not the soul and mind for so much as half a barley corn. Love is a black lion, thirsty and blood drinking. It pastures only on the blood of lovers. It clings to you in affection and drags you to the snare. When you have fallen in, then it looks on from afar. Love is a tyrannous prince, an unscrupulous police officer. It tortures and strangles the innocent. Whoso falls into love's hands weeps like a cloud. Whoso dwells afar from love freezes like snow. Every instant of love shatters 1,000 bowls into fragments. Every moment stitches and rends 1,000 garments. Love causes 1,000 eyes to weep and goes on laughing. Though the smjorg flies happily in Mount Kaf, when it sees love's snare, it falls and flies no more. No man escapes love's cords by deceit or madness. No reasoning man escapes from its snare by intelligence. My words are disordered because of love. Else I would have shown you the ways love travels. I would have shown you how love seizes the lion. I would have shown you how love hunts the prey. Up until the age of 37, Rumi was a traditional teacher. He was remarkably stable. He was famous. His father was famous. The family, after having moved many times, settled in what is now Turkey, Konya. Konya is the old Roman city of Iconium. And in Konya, Rumi was the most famous of all the intellectual teachers. He was the great intellect. He was responsible for the formal traditional schooling and education on the highest levels in Konya. He had a family, he had children. He threw all of it away because a stranger came to town. Some bandit, outlaw, genius, Superman. In Iranian lore, there are, in addition to men, peris, supernatural beings. This peri was named, he was from Tabriz, and so he was named Shamsi Tabrizi. And Rumi took him into his house, and the wild elegance of this outlaw wisdom master completely captivated him. Finally, the family and the city fathers and the establishment at every level found a way to get rid of this guy, and let's bring Rumi back. And for sure he was murdered, probably by common conspiratorial consent of Rumi's own children, of his fellow teachers, and of the officials from maybe a dozen towns. Rumi never returned to the traditional way of teaching. Why? Because he had fermented. Because he had transformed. Because he was now whiskey instead of water. They don't tell you this, but you cannot go back. You cannot untransform. When the wine loses its spirit, it doesn't become water, it becomes a vinegar. And there are all kinds of wisdom traditions about vinegar tasting. And that's okay too. In this wondrous differential universe, that's fine too. But you cannot go back. It's like the teeth of the shark are not made to bite you going in, but they're made to bite you if you try to come out. Transformation is like shark's teeth. The problem is not so much going in. It's natural to transform. Anyone can be enlightened. But you can't change your mind then and come back out and be regular, ignorant Joe and Jane. Then you get torn up by the shark's teeth of the process. It's perilous. It's dangerous. And so all the traditional cultures say this is not allowed. You're not allowed to transform. You're not allowed to become wise. This cannot be a part of our tribe, our culture. This is not a part of our tradition. And they're right. It isn't. In no way. There's a famous painting of the 7 wise men of China, and 6 of them are on one end of the boat, all cowering back from the 7th, which is the Zen master Bodhidharma, who's at the other end. There's no way to work him in. He's not one of the boys. He's not going to have supper with you at Morton's and discuss the next screenplay. This guy tears up manuscripts and people. So that transformation has this peculiar quality. Once Rumi had transformed, he was no longer able to be put back in the box. In his transformation, one of the key phrases that comes across, to quote this study of Rumi's poetry, The Triumphal Sun, Anna Marie Schimmel, The Triumphal Sun, on page 85, one of his famous lines, "As long as the cloud weeps not, how could the garden smile?" Part of what makes Rumi so universally enhancing is that beyond this visionary chaos, which is the differential energy turned loose, no one's keeping track because no one can keep track. There are no diagrammatic calipers that can be applied. No one knows. Once it's loosed, that's it. Pandora's box. It's out. What are you going to do? It has to be what it is, and what it is, no one knows. But there is a universal phenomenon that happens with transformation. Transformation has, in its differential mode, a quality of having a resonance of transformation. And there's a way to transform differential energy in keeping with transformation. Now, if you try to integrate differential energy, you end up with metaphysical systems that are so dead that the very paper that they're drawn on is already useless. The gurus, the so-called messiahs, the whole carnival. When the tarot images first came out of Sephardic Spain, they were the pictures that were on the gypsy caravan cars. Each of the cars in a single caravan had the play of images, and the caravan as a whole was the Chautauqua of wisdom. Spain is a radical country like Rumi. And Andalusia, the bushed hills of Granada, the fountains of Sevilla. It isn't torrents. This quality of a transformed men and women who now are free and wild in a universe that invites them to go anywhere they can imagine, has a built-in complement. It's like a symmetry, which is always there, courtesy of the gift or grace of reality. It's always there. Freedom is always paired with variation. Always. Variation is a differential symmetry with freedom. And just as freedom is endless, freedom needs only to be free. Variation also has its way of achieving objective form. Each variant on universal freedom is objectively, uniquely real. And so the person has a chance to be objective and real, even though they are one of a kind. So that the human person establishes its actuality in this mysterious field, not in nature, but in the supernatural, opened up freedom. This is the whole meaning, for instance, of the American experiment. Franklin and Jefferson, Thoreau, Emerson, Lincoln, Whitman. That's what they were talking about. When tradition in the wisdom mode showed that there were occasionally men and occasionally women who became free and were able to find new modes of life, what would happen if you had a country that encouraged millions of men and women to be free together? What kind of social experiment would happen? What kinds of forms would they make for themselves? No one knows. And no one will know until they are turned free and let loose to be whoever they choose to be together. Now that is really startling. That makes the French Revolution look like a parlor game. That is the kind of quality that's here in Rumi. When he writes this kind of poem. What was there in that light-giving candle that set it fire to the heart and snatched the heart away? You, who have set fire to my heart, I am consumed, O friend. Come quickly, quickly. The form of the heart is not a created form, for the beauty of God manifested itself from the cheek of the heart. I have no succor save in his sugar. I have no profit save in his lip. Remember him, who one dawn released this heart of mine from the chain of your tress. My soul, the first time I saw you, my soul heard something from your soul. When my heart drank water from your fountain, it drowned in you, and the torrent snatched us away. It's much like the admonition that was given in the Vajrayana, that when the transmission of high dharma is given, neither the teacher nor the student understands what's being said. And they both just relinquish to the flow. No one can keep track of it because it's not trackable in an integral way. But it is understandable in any degree of exactness that you want. But you have to use a kind of matrix tensor form of differential calculus. then you can go to the moon. Then you can know what it was all about. Why are the libraries of the world filled with mystical love poetry? Every people, every clime. Because that's where it's at. That's where our persons become objectively real. And once done, there's no way that can be undone. You say that matter can be converted into energy. That's fine. The energy can be converted back into matter. But there's no way that the reality of that goes away. And once the human person is made on that level, it's eternal. It doesn't matter. Life, death, good, bad, it doesn't make any difference at all. All of that is extraneous. And so Rumi, in some of his most majestic poetry, writes this way. Leap, leap from the world, that you may be king of the world. Seize the sugar tray, that you may be a sugar plantation. Leap, leap like a meteor to slay the god. When you leap out of stardom, you will be the pole of the heaven. When Noah sets out for the sea, you will be his ship. When the Messiah goes to heaven, you will be the ladder. Now, like Jesus of Mary, you will become the soul's physician. And now, like Moses of Imran, you will go forth to be a shepherd. There is a spiritual fire for the sake of cooking you. If you leap back like a woman, you will be a raw cuckold. If you do not flee from the fire and become wholly cooked, like well-baked bread, you will be master and lord at the table. When you come to the table and the brethren receive you, like bread, you will be the substance of the soul. You will be soul. Though you are the mine of pain, by patience you will become the treasure. Though you are a flawed house, you will become a knower of the unseen. I said this, and a call came from heaven to my spirit's ear, saying, if you become like this, you will be like that. Silence. The mouth is intended for cracking sugar, not to be slack and just wag the chin. So next week, art.